Welcome to episode 13 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. I'm your host, Mark Spagnolo, and today we're going to take a look at one of my favorite stationary power tools, the bandsaw. Now, I use it for resawing large boards, ripping long stock, making my own veneer, and cutting complex curves. But on today's show, I'm going to show you how to set up a new bandsaw like we've got here, or tune up your old bandsaw. Now, with the exception of the initial cleaning, the process is pretty much the same for both. So let's assume you've wrangled your new saw into position and you're ready to get started. We just plug it in and start cutting, right? Definitely not. We've got a little bit of cleaning to do first.
Most manufacturers ship their tools with a plastic sheet over the cast iron surfaces. Under that sheet is a rust preventative goo. The best way to remove that material is to use some sort of a solvent. Kerosene and mineral spirits are most commonly recommended. Here I'm using mineral spirits. I pour on a liberal amount of mineral spirits onto a rag and start wiping. It takes a while, but eventually you'll be rewarded with a nice, shiny cast iron top. But it won't stay that way for long if you don't add protection. If you do some Googling, you'll find tons of information about rust prevention on cast iron surfaces. Here's my favorite method. After the mineral spirits flashes off, I spray a good amount of product called T9 Bow Shield. This stuff was created by the Boeing company and has a great reputation amongst woodworkers for this exact purpose. I use a clean rag to spread the T9 and massage it into the surface. I then let the surface dry overnight. The next day, the surface will be a bit tacky, so I buff aggressively using a clean rag until the tackiness is gone. At that time, it's a good idea to add a little bit of wax. This will further protect the surface as well as make it nice and slick. My favorite wax for this job is Renaissance wax. A little bit goes a long way.
Now the next thing we should do is make sure that the wheels of the bandsaw are coplanar. Without coplanar wheels, the blade can drift off course and actually prevent us from getting consistent cuts. Now the idea is to run a straight edge across the top and bottom wheels to see if they're in alignment with one another. Now on some saws this is easier said than done. On my saw, for instance, I'd have to remove the cast iron tabletop. Now I had a hernia when I was 5 and I'm not looking to get another one at 30, so I don't think I'm going to remove the top. One alternative would be to secure equally sized wood blocks to each wheel. The blocks would have to be long enough to extend past the table, and then you could place your straight edge across those blocks to check for coplanarity. Now, to me that sounds like it's a little bit too much work, so since I've got quite a bit of faith in Powermatic's quality, I'm going to do all of my other adjustments first, and if the saw still doesn't run true, then I'm going to go through the table removal procedure and check the wheels. Now, if you can check your wheels, and you do find that they're actually not coplanar, you can easily shim the wheels out using small washers. Now let's turn our attention to the blade. It's a good idea to wear gloves whenever you handle a bandsaw blade. They're sharp and they're very awkward. Now this may sound crazy, but you want to make sure that there's no animals around while you do this, or children for that matter. A while back I accidentally left one of my blades on the ground and my dog ran by, got spooked, and took the blade with her. Now unfortunately it just got caught on the back of her paw and then it fell off. But it could have been far worse. I can't even imagine what would have happened if it went around her neck. So be careful. Now that I've got the blade out of the bandsaw, it's a good time for me to show you a quick tip for how to fold this bandsaw blade up. It's a lot harder than it sounds, and if you've ever tried to get into a nice little coil like this, you know what I mean. It's not that easy. So I've got a foolproof way of doing it. Make sure you got your gloves on, your eye protection on, and check it out. I grab the blade at about the 8 and 4 o'clock position so the majority of the blade is above my fingers. Keep your thumbs at the back of the blade, the flat part of the blade. And just use anything, really, the wall, the end of your bench, whatever you have handy, so that you can push up against it and essentially fold the blade in half. Now, don't blink because you might miss it, and I'll go in slow motion for you. Ready? Like that. And that pretty much does it. So just get a garbage tie, a rubber band, piece of tape, anything, it'll hold this together for you. Now that we've folded our blade, let's unfold it and get it ready for installation.
I like to clean the manufacturer's grease off of the blade using a rag soaked in mineral spirits. Be sure to pull the rag in the same direction as the teeth. Once the mineral spirits flashes off, I spray a dry film lubricant onto the entire blade and wipe off the excess using a clean rag. With the teeth facing down, I gently maneuver the blade into position over both wheels. You may need to lower the top wheel all the way down before the blade will slide on easily.
Now that the blade is installed, I bring the tension up just enough to hold the blade onto the tire so that it doesn't walk off when we turn it. Now we'll tighten it a little bit more later. For now, let's talk about the tracking. The tracking is adjusted essentially by tilting this wheel out or in and causing the blade to walk in one direction or the other. And the perfect setting is directly centered so that it's not walking at all. Now with the saw off and unplugged, we want to rotate the wheel by hand manually and make adjustments to our tracking. Now once the blade is tracking in the center of the tire and everything seems pretty secure, I'm going to tighten up the tension just a little bit more. I want to get it to the point that it's going to be safe to turn the machine on and test the tracking as the machine's going a little bit faster so we know for sure that it's not going to walk off the tire. But we don't want to turn this on until we know that there's enough tension in there to securely hold the blade in place. It's still a little bit loose, but I think that's good enough for now. So close the doors. Get everything nice and secure, everything off the table, and we're going to get ready to turn this guy on in short bursts just to see what happens, make sure everything looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. So let's talk a little bit about blade tension. Now this is one detail that really seems to be a challenge for many woodworkers. I think the most likely reason is due to this not so helpful little gauge up here. Now these spring gauges mean well, but they're rarely accurate, especially in the smaller range saws. In fact, in most cases, it's a good idea to tension your blade to the next highest number on the gauge. So if you have a 1/2-inch blade, bring the tension up to about 5/8. That's pretty good for a rough estimate. Now other methods for determining the proper tension are plucking the blade, like a guitar string, and listening for a particular note. Well, I'm a drummer, so you know that's not going to work. Now, the most accurate method would be to attach a tension meter to the blade. But tension meters cost hundreds of dollars, so that's really not feasible either. So, what do I usually do? I measure the amount of deflection. Now, with the guides set about 6 to 8 inches off of the table, I use my finger, maybe not that finger, you silly guys, my index finger, to push into the blade and look for the amount of deflection. I use a moderate amount of finger pressure. So what's moderate? Well, to me, moderate is the amount of pressure it takes to poke my wife in the arm and knock her off balance. Once you have that, push on the blade and see how much of a deflection we see. You really don't want any more than a 1/2 inch and no less than a 1/4 inch. So somewhere in that range is usually good. And I'm just barely getting a 1/4 here. That's pretty tight. I think that's where I want it. Now remember, there are some blades on the market that are designed to run at low tension. Now one in particular that I use once in a while is a Timberwolf blade. They actually have their own method for setting the tension, and I recommend you follow their instructions. Now let's turn our attention to the guides. Now the idea behind the guides is pretty obvious. They help to keep the blade straight and true under even the most demanding of cutting circumstances. Now usually there's a set of guides above the table and a set of guides below the table. Now each set consists of 2 side guides and a rear thrust bearing. Now the real challenge here is to find a way of guiding this blade without producing excessive amounts of friction and heat, both of which can shorten the life of the blade and decrease the quality of the cut. So the most basic guides are actually small metal blocks. These usually come standard with a number of saws, and I highly recommend upgrading if you have these. The metal-on-metal contact is just bad news. Now 2 inexpensive options to upgrade to would be either cool blocks, which are made from graphite impregnated phenolic, or ceramic guide blocks. Now both of those will reduce heat and friction, they'll increase the life of your blade, and they will improve the quality of your cut. Now if you're lucky, your bandsaw came with bearing guides. And if it didn't, you can always upgrade to that type of guide system. But to be honest, I think your shop allowance is better spent elsewhere. $15 for cool blocks is a good return on investment. $150 for Carter bearings? Not so much. But either way, the setup process is the same.
Let's dial in the rear thrust bearing. We want the bearing about a 64th of an inch behind the blade. This way the blade can only contact the bearing if we're actually making a cut. A nice trick is to use a business card as a spacer. Insert the card between the bearing and the blade and bring the bearing forward until the business card is held in place without moving the blade. As you can see, I had to improvise on my saw. I use a similar technique for the side bearings, but instead of a business card, I use a sheet of paper. Adjust one side at a time, and remember, we only apply enough pressure to hold the paper in place, but not so much that the blade moves. One other detail to note, make sure that your side guides are positioned just behind the gullet of the blade's teeth. Otherwise, the sharp teeth can damage the guides over time.
Now we can do another quick procedure that'll improve the quality of the cut. The back of the blade will have a slight burr on it from the production process. This can actually create drag during the cut, which will make the cut less efficient. So whenever you install a new blade, make sure you round over the back of the blade using a silicon carbide stone. You can get one just like this at Rockler. Now the next thing we need to do is make sure that the blade is perfectly perpendicular to the table. It's done easily enough using a good engineer's square. And it helps if you have a little bit of a light behind the blade and you can actually see where the gaps are and you could adjust the table accordingly. Just be sure to consult your owner's manual to find out exactly how to adjust your table. Not every saw is exactly the same. New bandsaw owners usually have a rude awakening when they line up their fence, start cutting, and then they realize the blade seems to want to walk or pull the piece away from the fence. Now, it doesn't take long before you realize that every blade seems to cut at a slightly different angle. This property is actually known as the drift, and you need to adjust the fence for it every time you change your blade. Now some people say that if your wheels are perfectly coplanar and everything is set just right, the blade will cut perfectly straight. Well, I've yet to come across a blade that doesn't require drift adjustment, so let's get down to it.
I start by scribing a line about 1/4 inch in from the edge of a piece of scrap that's been milled on all 4 sides. I then cut the line freehand until I'm about halfway through the board. At this point, I hold the board securely while the blade comes to a stop. I then use a bevel gauge to copy the current angle. This angle represents the drift angle. And this is the angle we're going to have to follow if we want to cut a straight line using the fence. Some saws allow you to adjust the fence angle directly. Mine requires me to lock down the fence and make the adjustments using the rail. To test our tune-up, I'm going to slice a thin sheet of alder from this jointed and planed 4/4 board. One other thing that I tested but forgot to film was making sure that my fence was square to the table. This is critical for cutting veneer.
As you can see, with some basic adjustments, we can cut some pretty thin veneer. And with some extra fine tuning, we can even cut thinner sheets. And one other adjustment that we didn't cover today is truing the rubber tires. This involves creating a little jig that sands down the tires as you spin the wheel manually. Basically just knocks down the high points and cuts down on blade vibration. Another good addition, which a lot of bandsaws come with these days, is a tire brush. It just mounts to the inside of the unit and the brush sits along the rubber tire, and as it spins it actually cleans off the dust and debris. Now the last detail I want to cover today is blade choice. The blade you choose depends on the type of work that you plan on doing. And even then, there's a lot of opinions out there about which blade is right for the job. So just remember the basics. More teeth equals a smoother cut. Less teeth equals a more aggressive cut. So if you plan on doing a lot of resawing, you might want something that's a pretty aggressive blade, something like a 1/2 inch hook or skip tooth blade with 3 teeth per inch. If you plan on cutting veneer, I usually use something that's probably around a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch hook tooth blade with 4 or 6 teeth per inch. Now for scrolling work and general curve cuts, I recommend a 1/4 inch blade with at least 6 teeth per inch. But remember, these are just my recommendations based on my experience. Over time, you'll develop your own preferences and they may be completely different than mine. Now thanks for checking out the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me at thewoodwhisperer@gmail.com. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for clicking on the links and shopping at the Wood Whisperer store. We really do appreciate your support of the show. I also have a few quick announcements. In case you haven't heard, we're now selling the Wood Whisperer video podcast on DVD. We're trying to squeeze as many episodes as we can on each DVD so that you get the most bang for your buck. Click the link at the top of our homepage for more details. And one other quick announcement, it's about a new podcast. I'm sure most of you know Matt from Matt's Basement Workshop. Well, he and I have been discussing the possibility of starting a special new audio podcast. It's going to be called Wood Talk Online. The show is going to cover all kinds of woodworking topics, including tips, techniques, emails, and even stories from our own shops. In other words, it's just two guys talking wood. So if you have any questions that you'd like answered by Matt and myself, please email us at woodtalkonline@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody.